Welcome to the debates. Today we are stepping directly into a massive global entertainment phenomenon, BL. And this is a genre that has just exploded, really. It's gone from these niche subcultures to a multi-billion-dollar industry of streaming shows and fan conventions. It's a world built entirely on the visual language of queer romance. But as it's gotten bigger, a tension that's been simmering for a while has finally, boiled over. The question is this: do actors in BL dramas need to be queer themselves?
And it sounds on the surface like a pretty simple casting question, doesn't it? Who's right for the role? But when you actually analyze the industry, it's clear it's a proxy for a much bigger fight. We're not just talking about who gets to read the lines. We're arguing about labor, about privacy, about the safety of performers, and the very nature of what authenticity means in art.
Exactly. The stakes are just incredibly high because this is a genre that literally monetizes intimacy. Now, my stance is rooted in the structural reality of the industry. I'm going to argue that casting in this genre demands a kind of ethical intervention. We just can't ignore the unequal playing field. And prioritizing queer actors for these roles, it's not just a nice to have. It's a necessary corrective for historical exclusion and to tap into a unique kind of emotional literacy that really only comes from lived experience.
And I'll be taking the opposing view, because while equity is of course important, I believe the lens here has to be artistic freedom and, maybe most importantly, safety. Acting is a craft, not a confession. And when you consider that a huge part of the BL industry is in regions with, pretty severe social or legal penalties for LGBTQ people, demanding this kind of identity disclosure, well, it poses real, tangible dangers. We can't confuse the character with the actor without breaking the art form itself.
Okay, so let's start there with breaking down the machinery, specifically the economic engine driving all this. The argument for queer casting for me has to begin with the undeniable asymmetry of the market. Historically and right now, queer actors have significantly fewer opportunities than their straight colleagues. We see this. This phenomenon of the tourist. A straight actor, or a closeted one, can effectively tour a queer role. They star in a huge BL hit, they get millions of followers, sell out fan events, and then they just return to playing straight romantic leads without a single scratch on their career.
Okay, but you call it touring. But isn't that just acting? The job is literally to embody a life that isn't your own. If I play a doctor, I'm touring medicine for a few months. Why does this specific distinction make the labor suddenly unethical?
Because you're not systematically excluded from becoming a doctor in real life because of your identity. In entertainment, openly queer performers are so often pigeonholed or just excluded entirely from mainstream roles. So you get this ethical paradox that's really specific to BL. The genre's whole foundation is the aesthetic of queer intimacy. It generates massive wealth and global fame from that intimacy. And yet the very people whose lives reflect that reality, queer performers, are often left on the sidelines while others profit from their identity. When we cast straight actors without even a second thought, we reinforce a system where, queerness is profitable, but queer people are not.
That's a sharp economic critique, I'll give you that. But if you try to solve an economic problem by fundamentally changing the definition of acting, you end up creating a really dangerous precedent for the art form. The core principle of performance is that it is an autobiography. Actors play murderers without having killed anyone. They play historical figures they've never met. Their job is to inhabit emotional states that are completely foreign to them. So if we start demanding that an actor must share an identity with their character to be considered ethical, we're really undermining the foundation of the entire profession.
But is an identity the same as an action? Is being queer really the same as being a murderer?
In the context of a script, yes. It's a set of characteristics you're hired to portray. If we insist only queer actors can play queer roles, we reduce queer identity to what? A line item on a resume? It becomes a required skill, not a complex human experience. And more than that, this demand for authenticity inevitably leads to the danger of outing people. You're assuming sexuality is always visible or that every actor has it all figured out and is just ready to announce it to a casting director.
See, you're stripping away the nuance of what that authenticity actually brings to the performance. We really need to talk about this idea of emotional literacy. because I think that's the strongest argument against your acting is just acting point.
Emotional literacy? It sounds a bit like a buzzword. What does it actually mean when the cameras are rolling?
It means that authenticity isn't just about the mechanics of a kiss or a chemistry read. It's about the lived experience of moving through the world as a queer person. A queer actor brings a subtle, baked-in authenticity to a role. They understand the hesitation before a public touch, the navigation of shame, the coded language you use in unsafe spaces. This is a literacy that's born from survival, and it's incredibly difficult to just simulate that if you haven't lived it. A straight actor might play the romance perfectly well, but they often miss the subtext of risk that defines queer love in so many of these stories.
I have to push back on that, though. To say a non-queer actor can't understand coded affection or risk is, well, it's to say they lack empathy or imagination. That is literally what acting training is for, to bridge that gap between yourself and someone else. A good actor does the research, they build empathy, they can portray that fear. But okay, let's look at the consequences of what you're asking for. You want authenticity, fine. But we're talking about BL, a genre largely produced in places like Thailand, South Korea, Japan, places where the social and legal risks for LGBTQ people can be incredibly high.
The risks are real, I grant you that. But the industry uses those risks as a crutch.
They aren't a crutch. They are career-ending, family-straining realities. In many of these places, coming out publicly can mean losing endorsement deals, getting harassed, alienating your family. And the studios know this. They actively avoid what they see as risk. So if we demand authenticity, if a casting call literally says, "must be openly gay," we are forcing actors to out themselves just to get a job. In that context, demanding authenticity feels invasive. It sounds noble, but without systemic protections in place, you are asking people to put themselves on the line for the sake of our viewing pleasure.
That is the common defense, I know, but I think it's used as a shield to protect the status quo. By relying on straight actors because it's safer, we are actively contributing to the erasure of queer actors who are out or who are willing to be visible and are struggling for work.
But are you willing to sacrifice the privacy of the actor who isn't ready?
What I'm saying is the industry uses safety as an excuse to keep transferring wealth away from the community it's depicting. When straight actors play these roles, they get the visibility of BL without facing any of the professional dangers of being openly queer. They get the rewards of the BL boom without the risks of the queer life. It's a transfer of cultural capital. The argument isn't to force everyone out of the closet. The argument is to prioritize those who are already facing the structural barriers.
Okay, but that assumes the industry is some benevolent meritocracy that just needs a little nudge. It's not. It's a business. And there's a unique part of the BL business model that makes this even more complicated. We have to talk about fan service.
Ah, the marketing machine. Yes. This is where the exploitation becomes really tangible.
Right. This isn't like Hollywood where the credits roll and the actor goes home. In the BL world, the actors are expected to maintain the illusion of romance off-screen. They do these fan meetings, they post couple-y photos on social media, they act like a couple on variety shows. For a straight actor, this is a performance. It's a job. They can clock out at the end of the day because there isn't this relentless scrutiny of their actual sexuality.
But for a queer actor,
It becomes incredibly fraught, and the analysis really highlights this tension. For a queer actor in that situation, their real identity gets speculated on, it gets commodified, sometimes it even gets punished. If they're actually queer but are dating someone else in real life, suddenly they're cheating on the fantasy ship. If their own queerness doesn't match the sanitized version in the drama, they face backlash. So the real question becomes, is BL asking actors to perform queerness or to safely imitate it?
And that distinction, performing versus imitating, that is the absolute crux of it. If we accept that the industry just wants safe imitation, then we're accepting a kind of cultural consumption that wants the aesthetic of gay romance without the reality of gay people. It reinforces the idea that queerness is only okay when it's a fantasy performed by safe, presumably straight bodies. It sanitizes the messy political reality of queer life into a product.
But until the industry is safe, that imitation protects the performer. That's my entire point. You want to tear down the wall for authenticity, but the people inside those walls are relying on the protection that acting provides. If a queer actor plays a role and lets the audience believe it's all just fan service, they maintain a veil of privacy that might be the very thing that keeps them employed and safe in their real lives. Acting is the closet that allows them to work in plain sight.
That is a fascinating, if deeply depressing, way to look at it. You see the separation between actor and role as a shield. I see it as a barrier to entry. You said before we shouldn't gatekeep identity, but isn't the current system the ultimate gatekeeper? It basically says you can be in this show about gay men as long as you don't bring the actual baggage of being a gay man with you.
I wouldn't call it baggage. I'd call it the right to a private life. Gatekeeping happens when we start demanding disclosure. If we say only queer actors for queer roles, we are essentially creating a registry. We're policing identity. What about an actor who's questioning or someone who's fluid? Do they have to submit a written statement of their desires to a casting director? I mean, that is a terrifying prospect for labor rights.
It's only terrifying if you see it as a bureaucracy of confession instead of an affirmative action of talent. I'm not asking for a purity test. I'm asking for that emotional literacy I mentioned. When a director casts a role, they look for skills, right? Can you ride a horse? Can you speak French? Why isn't has lived experience of the marginalized identity you are portraying considered a valuable skill?
It's a state of being. And the moment you make a state of being a requirement for a job, you violate basic principles of equal opportunity. Plus, the analysis we're looking at warns that demanding this might actually force actors to perform a sanitized version of queerness.
Explain that. What do you mean by sanitized?
Well, BL is a fantasy genre. It relies heavily on tropes. We have to talk about the seme and uke dynamic, which is often this very rigid, almost heteronormative caricature of a relationship imposed on gay men. The seme is the tall, stoic, masculine one. The uke is smaller, emotional, submissive. If you put a real queer actor in that role and say, be authentic, but the script requires them to act in a way that feels totally foreign to their actual experience, you create this huge dissonance.
And you think that dissonance is a bad thing?
It's deeply uncomfortable. You're asking them to use their personal identity to validate a script that might be completely unrealistic. A straight actor doesn't feel that same conflict because it's all just a script to them. They can play the samey trope without feeling like they're betraying their own reality.
But that dissonance is the value. A queer actor wrestling with a bad BL script might bring a nuance that actually subverts the trope. They might find a moment of truth in a sea of fantasy. That's what elevates the genre from pulp to art. If we only have actors who treat it as just a script, the genre never evolves. It stays stuck in that sanitized fantasy. We need actors who can bridge that gap.
I suppose we have to ask if it's the actor's job to evolve the genre or the writer's. A bad script is a bad script, but I want to pivot back to the money because we keep circling this pink dollar.
The economic exploitation is impossible to ignore. It really is.
But is the solution to restrict the casting or to expand the protections for everyone? The material suggests that a middle ground isn't about checking IDs at the casting call. It's about whether the industry creates space and safety. If a straight actor plays a queer role but does it with respect, with humility, is that inherently exploitative?
Inherently, maybe not. But practically, it almost always results in erasure. When that straight actor accepts the Best Couple Award and gives a speech about love is love, while his queer colleagues can't even get an audition because they're too femme or too controversial, then yes, that is exploitation. It's using the struggle of a community for your own personal gain. Representation isn't just about who's on screen. It's about who is allowed to succeed.
Who is allowed to succeed? I agree with that completely, but my path to that success involves protecting the right to privacy. If we create an environment where the only way to succeed in a queer role is to be publicly, vocally queer, we limit success to those who can afford that risk. We limit it to people in safe countries or with supportive families. We might unintentionally shut the door on a queer actor in a conservative region who desperately needs that job but can't afford the label.
And that is the tragedy of the current system, yes. But I'm not convinced that silence is the answer. The advocate perspective here is that we have to push the industry to become safer so that people can be open, rather than telling people to stay in the closet for their own safety.
But we can't just legislate that safety into existence overnight. We have to deal with the world as it is right now.
True, but casting is one of the tools we use to change the world. By proving that out, queer actors can carry a show and bring in revenue. We prove to the studios that their so-called risk is imaginary, or at least manageable.
Or we prove that the fantasy is broken. That fan service element is so key here. If a BL couple is marketed as real, and then one actor is revealed to be queer in real life but is dating someone else, the fans often revolt. The fantasy of the ship relies on a blank slate. And paradoxically, a straight actor provides a better blank slate for fans to project onto than a queer actor with a real, messy life.
Which is precisely why the whole system is toxic. If the fantasy depends on erasing real queer lives, then the fantasy itself is fundamentally flawed. We're consuming the shell of a person while rejecting the human inside. It's a psychological split where fans love the idea of a gay relationship but often reject the reality of a gay actor.
It might be toxic, but it's the business model. And we're talking about the ethics of working within that model. We can't just wish it away.
Then maybe the ethics require us to dismantle the model. But let's look at the middle ground the analysis brings up. It shifts the question away from, must they be queer, to, does the industry create space?
Yes, and I think that's the most productive place for us to land. It's about intent and infrastructure. A healthy ecosystem would see queer actors cast without being tokenized, but it also means we need to see queer actors in non-queer roles too.
Exactly. If a queer actor could play the superhero and the villain and the dad, then the pressure on this one BL role wouldn't be so incredibly high. The reason this debate is so heated is because of scarcity. BL is one of the only genres where queer narratives are centered. If queer actors get shut out of that, they're effectively shut out everywhere.
I agree. The scarcity is what creates the conflict. If there were an abundance of roles, we wouldn't be fighting over crumbs. The analysis envisions a future with protections against outing, with roles that go beyond tragedy, and, this is key, with straight actors playing queer roles without profiting at queer expense.
And that phrase, without profiting at queer expense, that's everything. It means acknowledging the debt the genre owes the community. It means straight actors using their platform to advocate for their queer colleagues, not just soaking up the applause.
And it means the industry has to move beyond exploitation and toward genuine inclusion. But I do stick to my guns on the privacy issue. The answer can't be a mandate. It can't be a purity test. We can't liberate actors by forcing them into a new set of rules about their private lives.
And I will hold to the position that while a mandate is clumsy, an ethical commitment to prioritizing lived experience is necessary. We need to tip the scales back. We need a kind of affirmative action for authenticity.
As we wrap up, I think the synthesis is really important here. The answer to do BL actors need to be queer? It isn't a simple yes or no. As the dissenter, I maintain the focus shouldn't be on the actor's identity card, but on the industry's safety net. Does it create a space where an actor can be queer if they choose, without it being a career death sentence?
And I would add that the goal isn't just safety, it's recognition. We need a world where the emotional literacy of queer actors is valued as a specific high-level skill, not treated like a liability. The industry has to move beyond using queerness as a costume and start respecting it as a lived reality.
Ultimately, it seems we both agree on the final vision. We want a world where queer love on screen and off doesn't have to hide to survive. Where we differ is on how best to get there.
It is a complex issue, for sure. No easy answers, but one that demands our attention. Representation isn't just the image on the screen, it's the machinery behind it.
Exactly. It's about who gets to tell the story and who's allowed to survive telling it.
That does it for this edition of The Debate. Join us next time.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next one.